Hello, everyone. My internet is being crap at the minute, so it may cut out, it may not. It may tell me I can't move things or look at things. So we'll see how we go. Today we are going to be looking at caregiver-infant interactions. The first bullet point of attachment. We are joined by young Candice over there, just on her
Why
phone.
would you do that?
So it's the start of attachment today. Quite a big bullet point. Sorry, I've got this rest on my lap, so my meter is going all over the place. Quite a big bullet point. So if I scroll down, let's have a little look. Down to attachment, which you can see here. Bloody hell. The first bullet point is massive, which is what we're going to be covering today. Oh my god, why are you doing this to me? Okay, well, as you can see here. What? Right, you know what? Sorry, you can see this. Caregiver-infant interactions in humans. You need to know about reciprocity, and remember, any term that comes up in the spec, you can get a question on that. So reciprocity, you need to know. Interactional synchrony, you need to know. You need to know the stages of attachment identified by Schaffer, and you need to know about multiple attachments as well as the role of the father, who plays a very, very specific role in child rearing. So there's a lot we are going to cover today. There's one named piece of research. There's a lot of other pieces of research. So we might as well make a start. So just break down this just here. Caregiver, infant, and how they interact with each other. The first two key terms you need to know are reciprocity and interactional synchrony. And there's a very, very slight difference between the two. So my recommendation would be to go on to these slides and just have a look at some of these examples about interactional synchrony and reciprocity, but you will need a definition. So let's start with reciprocity, and to reciprocate something is to do something back to someone who's just done it to you. So if I were to, I don't know, give you a pen, you would take the pen and then you would reciprocate that action by giving it back to me, i.e., you don't do it at the same time. That's really important. When you reciprocate something, you do something afterwards. So, in terms of interactions between caregiver and infants, this involves what we call mutual responsiveness. So, the interactions will move from the caregiver to the baby, from the baby to the caregiver, and it will go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So, a good example of this, and you do need to be able to provide an example, is when individuals communicate signals which elicit reciprocal responses in the other person. For examples, a mother will smile at her baby, the baby sees that, and then smiles back after the mother smiled at the baby. So it's reciprocity. And this happens, by the way, and note this about reciprocity. Reciprocity is able to be seen very, very early on after the child is born. So the example here is when reciprocity isn't given, what happens to the infant when the caregiver does not respond. So if a baby goes, and the mother just kind of looks at the baby and doesn't reciprocate, the infant is confused and upset, suggesting that reciprocity is actually quite important in developing attachment relationships.
That was a really scary noise.
Thanks. I do it to the class all the time, just not for attachment, just for anything really. So reciprocity is quite important, and we can see this when we take reciprocity away. The very slight difference, interactional synchrony, is when the behaviors or the interactions between the caregiver and the infant are done at the same time. So they are in synchrony with each other. They are synchronized. They are done at the same time. So this is largely movement. this is largely movement, so it can mean mirroring the action. So the infant moves her head in time with the mother. So maybe they're doing that, for example, just, I don't know, playing a weird game with each other. Babies can't really do much. They are absolutely useless, by the way. They can do nothing. But then they're kind of doing that, right? But they're doing it at the same time. That is a form of communication. One isn't reciprocating after the other. They're doing it at the same time. So baby sticks out tongue, for example, and they'll be wagging their tongue. Baby dancing, copying the mum. These are done at the same time. Now, I don't really see the value in these terms, really. However, you do need to know them. You do need to know them. I just think it's a bit nitpicky, the difference between them. Fine, that's the first one, right? But how do we actually know an attachment is formed? It's worth noting that an attachment is a two-way emotional bond. Those of you who have cats and dogs will have, probably, unless you are some sort of monster, you will have a attachment to your dog, and your dog will have an attachment to you. Those with cats maybe less so, because cats don't really make attachments because they're so up themselves, but generally speaking, you will. Now, in terms of a baby, there's 4 key behaviors that the baby will show when it has made an attachment. So you'll find this out in a second, but attachments are formally made around about 8 to 9 months, 8 to 9 months, really, probably around about 8 months. A 6-month-old will probably not have made an attachment. 5-month-old, definitely not. 3-month-old, definitely not. But around about 8 months, the baby will make a proper attachment onto specific people. And a lot of what you've got here, by the way, is stuff you're absolutely going to need for the next 6 weeks. So one way you can tell a baby has shown attachment or made an attachment is that they seek proximity to certain people. They try to stay close to mainly the mother, but also the father as well. And by the way, this may not be in your workbook, but you definitely want to just make a note of these because you will need them later on. So not only do they show attachment by seeking proximity, but they also show attachment by being clearly stressed when the main caregiver is away, and this is called separation anxiety. So if the mother were to walk out of the room, thank you, then do you want to finish? Then the baby is going to try chase after the baby. No, not baby's not. Sorry, it's been a long day. Now, a story I tell my students is a few. I'm going to talk about an ex-girlfriend here. Sorry, but a few years ago, me and an ex-girlfriend of mine went up north to see her family, and the whole time we went to see her family. The whole time, my ex's sister was with her baby Alfie the whole time, the whole weekend. Didn't leave her side. And whenever Rachel left the room, Alfie would go absolutely mental. Alfie was about 9 months old at this stage. As we were leaving, I was helping the mum put the baby in the car seat. And then at that moment, Rachel realised she'd forgot something, went, "Oh, I just need to run in the house," and ran in. And I honestly, I realised this was the first time I'd been left with Alfie the whole weekend. It was the first time that Alfie had been left alone at all. And I realised it maybe a second before Alfie, because I turned round as he turned to me, and he just went, and there's no other word for it, in a small enclosed space like a car, he went absolutely batshit, apeshit crazy. He was crying, he was thrashing around, he was trying to get away from me, he was trying to chase after his mum. That kid's made an attachment, and it is not to me. Rachel then come running back out again, and you see the third one here as well, pleasure when reunited. Babies are amazing when they are attached. when they are reunited. They can be crying the house down. They can be screaming really high pitch. Mum picks it up, stops crying straight away. So that again is evidence of attachments. And generally speaking, PAF is primary attachment figure. All of the behaviour is geared towards the caregiver. So, the baby will keep looking round to check the caregiver's there. When the baby is happy, it will turn to its mum or dad, for example. When the baby is scared, it will turn to its mum or dad. So these are the 4 factors which you do need to know. And again, Maccoby 1980, you're definitely going to need to know that later on. There's a couple of other ones which I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but caregiverese is a really fascinating thing. It's a really interesting thing. Caregiverese is the language that parents use with their kid, and it's absolute gobbledygook. It doesn't make any sense. It's high pitch, slow tones, and we do it naturally. If I were to just, I don't know, steal a baby from somewhere and come into class one day and hand most of you a baby, and we ignore the fact of just kidnap someone or baby nap someone, we gloss over that. Most of you, probably female, particularly female actually, you would bounce the baby up and down on your arm and you would talk like this, and you would talk like that, basically. You would, and that's how you talk to it. And it's called caregiverese. And basically, a mum and a dad will tune in to what its infant in particular needs. Another story as well, I remember my sister, it was many years ago now, but Josie, my niece, was very young, and I'm going to make another weird sound here, by the way. So, and she literally made the sound like, and my sister's head appeared around the door, and she turned to Steve, her husband, and was like, "Oh, Steve, she needs burping." And I was like, "Well, how do you know she needed burping?" And she was like, "Oh, that's just the sound she makes. That's just the sound she makes when she needs burping." And about 20 minutes later, I swear, the same sound. The same sound. And Steve went, I think she needs changing. And I was like, well, how do you know? And she was like, oh, it's just, you can just tell. And I'm like, no, you can't. It was exactly the same thing. But the mum and and they were right both times, by the way. The mum and the dad tune in to what, and again, it's part of that baby parent interaction. It's on a level that people outside of that attachment can't really understand a lot of the time. So there's a clip there, definitely worth looking at. But the other thing I want to go through here is Schaffer's 4 stages of attachment. So there's 4 stages. There are voice notes on this in case you aren't watching the video, but if you're not watching the video, you didn't really hear that. So you do need to know the terms. There are other names for these stages. I don't care what ones you use as long as you do it consistently. So, for example, the pre-attachment stage is sometimes called the asocial stage. Just stick with one. Don't confuse yourself. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. The first 3 months, so the first, what's 3 months? 12 weeks of a baby's life, no attachment made whatsoever. They do know what human faces are, but they don't recognize them. They don't know who their mum and dad is. They literally would smile at someone robbing them. They have no attachments whatsoever. And at this stage, anybody can pick up the kid. You need to make a note of all of those, by the way. Anyone can pick the kid up. Between 3 to 7 or 3 to 8 months, you're in the indiscriminate attachment phase. Now, indiscriminate means, not specific. So you are not specific about who picks you up. You do recognize who mum and dad are. You do recognize who your brothers are or your sisters, but you don't care who picks you up. You will smile and laugh at the people you do recognize, but you're not going to scream the house down if a aunt from New Zealand comes over and picks you up, for example. You're still going to be relatively happy. Now, around about 7, 8, potentially 9 months of age, you are going to start caring who picks you up. You are going to start discriminating against who picks you up. And the first attachment is usually the parent who is most sensitively responsive to you, who understands what your needs are the best. And it will typically be the parent who spends most time with you, which typically in society is the mother, though not always. So infants begin to develop attachments to particular people. They become distressed if they're separated. And this is where stranger anxiety appears. You don't like being picked up by a stranger. You don't like being separated from your caregiver. Fine. And then eventually, from 9 months old, you will begin to make multiple attachments. Now, here's the big question you need to note down. Are your later attachments, so maybe your dad, grandparents, siblings, are they secondary to your primary attachment, probably a mum, in the sense of they're not as strong ever? Or can they be as strong as your primary attachment? There's a big debate about this, which we are going to have, but you need to know that question is coming. Is the second, third, and fourth attachments, can they theoretically be as strong as the first one you make? Fine. These are the 4 stages you do need to know. But you also need to know Schaffer and Emerson's piece of research. So 1964, mid-60s, free love and all that. Schaffer and Emerson did a study in Glasgow in Scotland. This is a named piece of research, by the way, so you do need to know this. It's a longitudinal study, so they studied the same people for a long time, tracking their development. And they basically looked at 60 newborn mothers, not newborn mothers, but mothers are rarely newborn, 60 newborn babies and their mothers. And they observed them, and just think about the methodological issues with this. They observed how the mothers interacted with their babies in their own front rooms, and they just sat in a corner, the researchers. And then they observed them again at 18 months. They questioned them. They interviewed the mothers. Obviously, they didn't question the babies, and like who they sought out when they were stressed out, so on and so forth. They were looking for 2 particular behaviours: separation protest, stranger anxiety, and you have the definitions for them just there, but the definitions are in the term anyway. This is what they found. Now, I'm not going to go through all these, but I personally would recommend you know at least 4 of these pieces of research off the top of your head for the exam. 6 to 8 months old is when most infants showed separation protest for the first time, i.e., they're starting to make that attachment. 9 months old was when they showed most stranger anxiety. And that is kind of the end of the first attachment being made. This is quite offensive to me. At 18 months old, almost 90% of infants had made at least 2 attachment bonds. And at 18 months old, 31%, almost a third of babies have got 5 or more attachments. That's more attachments than I have now. At 18 months old, I'm being outfriended by a baby who's 1.5. But probably the most important finding, I think, is the bottom one. Let's just round it up. 40% of babies had their primary attachment to someone other than the person who looked after them the most. If we go by society, it's the mother who looks after the baby the most. 40% or 39% of kids, their primary attachment is not actually to the mother, it's probably to the father, possibly to grandparents. So it shows that it isn't just a case of who spends the most time with someone. And that's really important. It's who is able to look after your needs the most, who's able to read your needs the most. And we'll go on to that in a second. I'm not going to go into, and by the way, this is this term just here. Sensitive responsiveness. Attachments are more likely to be formed with people who show sensitive responsiveness. Now, she is in the room, so I'm going to try to do this in a nice way. But with Bella, I personally feel as if I know Bella's needs better than Candy. I think that's fair, right?
You do, yeah.
I do, thank you. She said it. There's some videos recorded. So yesterday, for example, I was upstairs and I just got the sense that she wanted to sit down, like on one of us, always me. And then I came downstairs, put the hoodie on me, and she jumped on straight away. Mothers and fathers get like that with babies. They get very, very in tune with understanding what it is their babies need. Now, mothers are generally better at reading low levels of emotional distress than fathers are. And females are generally better anyway than males. But again, that's like saying all males are taller than all females. This is just not true. It's in general, yes, but it's just not true generally. So there are some males who are particularly very good at sensitive responsiveness. They can zone in on their maybe girlfriend or boyfriend's emotional distress and think, you're quite stressed. And there are some females who are awful at it. So key points here. Key points. A few evaluations, which I'm not going to go through, but they are here. If you do want them, feel free to pause the video. And there is, I believe, a model, a very good, not very good, but an adequate model answer here. An adequate model answer, if that makes any sense whatsoever. You've got your point. You've got evidence from the piece of research. You've got an elaboration on why your point is important. It's not valid. It needs objectivity, right? And then you have a link back that just ties all the point together. But I'm not going to go through that now because there's enough here. There's a few pieces of alternate research. Carpenter 1975. You may want to pause the video here because this is a good piece of evidence against Schaffer and Emerson. And I believe they contradict. Oh yeah, it says down the bottom. This contradicts Schaffer and Emerson's proposal. Fine, right? So maybe use this. But I also want to start asking this question, and this is a question I'm going to get you to answer. Are dads important? Are they needed? Do infants have an equal relationship with their mum and their dad? Now, you are going to have your personal opinion about this, but your personal opinion, don't take it the wrong way, is going to be based on your personal experience, and that's only an anecdote. We need to look wider here. We need to look wider, but let's start having a look at multiple attachments first. There isn't much you need to know about multiple attachments. They start at 9 months old. Fathers tend to, and this is quite important before we get into this, fathers play the role of the playmate better than mums, much better. Mums are too protective generally to play this role. Fathers tend to be a bit riskier in their play. So sorry, I've got this tea that's calling me to drink. Oh, so good. Anyway, you don't really need to know much about multiple attachments. They start about 9 months. Bowlby says you don't get multiple attachments. Schaffer and Emerson say you do. I'm sorry, Bella's just ran in. Wait, sensitive responsiveness. She's hyper. There you go. Nailed it. Role of the father. Right. Is there any point? Bella, I'm talking about you. Bella. Here, now. Bella, come here. Come here. All right. Fine. Sorry. 4 key parts of the role of the father. You need to know all 4 of these, and you need to know pieces of research. So let's have a look at the first one. Come here, Bella. Come here. Look, come here. Come here. Look, love me. Fine. See? We get on. What a bitch. So, First things first, degree of sensitivity. As you just saw, that a very, very good degree of sensitivity. Infants who are more securely attached to their fathers, infants are more securely attached to their fathers who respond appropriately and sensitively. Let me ask you, does your dad or your stepdad or your guardian or grandparents or whatever, do they respond accurately to how you feel and your needs? Um, the better dads, scientifically, um, are very good at knowing something is wrong. So some students often say, if I'm upset and I go home and I don't want to tell my parents, sometimes they say my dad can know straight away that something's up. So that's quite a key factor. The type of attachment your dad has with his own parents is quite important. That's quite important. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. Marital intimacy. We don't want to. I know you don't want to think about marital intimacy too much. You don't want to know how close your mum and dad are, or your step parents, for example. But fathers that are more intimate with their partners are more likely to have secure attachments. So basically, do your parents get on? Right? Do they engage in relationship maintenance techniques such as date nights, such as, do they love, I hate, like as in, psychology can't really measure love, etc., but do they love each other, for example? If they do, you're probably going to have secure relationships with your attachments. And the other thing here, it's quite an important one: supportive co-parenting. Supportive co-parenting. Fathers who play more of a role in child rearing and parenting are more likely going to. So basically, does your dad, and I guess we're talking heterosexually here, in heterosexual normative relationships, whatever, does your dad back up your mum in child rearing? At the end of the day, do they support each other? Do they help each other? Do they agree? Do they, in terms of how to raise kids, for example? Fathers who play more of a role in child rearing, a bit more hands-on maybe, are more likely going to have secure attachments with their own children. So these four elements play a key role in the role of the father. The role of the father is different to the role of the mother. It is. Can a dad play both roles? Can they be the risk taker but also the nurturer? Yes, the same way single mums can. But they are different. They are different. The example I will briefly tell you, and I won't tell you this actually. I'll tell you in class. But if I don't tell you, remind me to tell you the story about the time that we were throwing the kid to each other. If you watch this, and I'll explain. I can't bother to tell the story now. Anyway, Frody. Now this is where you need to know a few pieces of research. Now I'm not going to go through these pieces of research. None of these are named. That's important. So you only need to know a few sentences about what they found. So Frody, and I'm going to go for this very, very briefly. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Frody basically measured the sweat and the blood pressure of mums and dads. And they found that there was actually no difference in sweat pressure or blood pressure. Sweat pressure. There was no difference in sweat conductance or blood pressure when you showed mothers and fathers things about like their kids or asking them about the perception of their own child, which suggests that biologically mums are not programmed to be the primary caregiver. The mums and the dads have the biological potential to be the primary caregiver. We just make mums, and the research suggests we just make mums the primary attachment because they have a head start in bonding, etc., etc. But biologically, mums do not show any what's the way to phrase this? mums do not show any biological preference for child rearing, basically. So a mum and a dad can be the primary caregiver. A mum or a dad can be the primary caregiver, which I think is quite interesting. Geiger is a piece of research you need to know. Father's play is much more exciting and pleasurable. So kids enjoy being with their dad when they're in a good mood, but mothers are more nurturing and affectionate. So the way Geiger kind of phrased it, and other people phrased it, kids like spending time with their dad when they're in a good mood, but they like spending time with their mum when they're in a negative mood. Is the way some researchers have phrased it, and Lamb says exactly the same thing there, right? Hurdy, that's not misspelled by the way. Hurdy suggests that fathers are less able to detect low infant distress than mothers are, which again suggests that males are less suitable. So there's a bit of contradiction here. As you can see, Frody is saying mums and dads can both be the primary attachment, but then Hurdy is saying that actually mums are better because they have better sensitive responsiveness. And Lamb found that fathers who became the primary caregiver, say a mum dies during childbirth, doesn't really happen that much anymore. But evolutionarily, it often did. Or if mum, I don't know, has the kid taken off her for some reason. Fathers who became the primary caregivers quickly develop more sensitivity to the children's needs than they usually would. So a father can step up and change quite a bit and play that mother nurturing role. And there's two more here. Belsky and Brown. High levels of intimacy is linked to secure attachments. That's all you need to know. That's Belsky et al. And then Brown et al. Assessed attachment patterns in 68 families, and high levels of supportive co-parenting is linked to a secure attachment. Do you need to know all these pieces of research? Yes. Do you need to know every single word that's in here? No. You just need to know what they found generally. The sun's really starting to blast me in the face. Finally, exam questions. This one here is an AO2, and then you have some AO1 and AO3 down here. So Brian and Mikhail are discussing how they manage their childcare. Brian says, I take the children to the park most evenings when we run around or play football. Their mum, Julie, makes their evening meal and gives them a bath before putting them to bed. And Mikhail really brings the mood down here and says, it must be nice to have time to go to the park. As a single, lonely parent, I am the one who makes the evening meal and does the bedtime routine. Oh, Jesus Christ. Chill out. With reference to the conversation above, briefly discuss what research has shown about the role of the father. And this is why you need to know Belsky, Brown, Frody, Geiger, Hurdy, Lamb. This is why you need to know all those pieces of research. But this one's interesting, but I'm not going to go through this question because I'm probably going to test you on it. Explain the economic implications of research into the role of the father. You want to talk about taxes here. You want to talk about laws, parental leave laws, for example. You want to know about all of that. But that is it. A hefty bullet point with really, really different parts to it. You need to know all the pieces of research. Do not take your eye off that. Peace out.